Fresh out of college with my shiny new business degree, I found myself back in my childhood home. Not exactly the triumphant return I'd envisioned, but hey, life throws curveballs. I'm Anna, 22, and honestly, moving back in with my parents wasn't part of my 5-year plan. Thankfully, the job hunt didn't drag on. Within a week, I landed a marketing position at Davidson with a decent salary and the promise of performance bonuses. That evening, over Mom's infamous meatloaf, I shared the good news. I figured I'd stick around for 3 months, save up, and then snag my own apartment. The clinking of forks against plates screeched to a halt. Mom and Dad exchanged one of their "we've got a problem" looks. Moving out? Mom set down her fork with a sigh. Anna, you know I can only work part-time at the library because of my back and... Dad cleared his throat. Things aren't great at the plant. Rumors of layoffs. Mom jumped back in. We could really use your help with the bills, she added softly. And you wouldn't have to pay rent here. It just makes sense, doesn't it? I stared at my half-eaten meatloaf, feeling a familiar sense of obligation creeping in. They had a point, sort of, and they were my parents after all. So, I caved. Again. Life settled into a predictable routine. Work, pay bills, eat Mom's questionable cooking. It was manageable even, dare I say, okay. Until last weekend, when my sister, Sarah, rolled in with her husband, Mike, and their 2 kids, Emma and Lucas. The moment Sarah stepped through the door, it was like someone flipped a switch in my parents. Oh, my precious angels, Mom cooed, scooping up 4-year-old Emma while Dad swung Lucas onto his shoulders. Sarah, darling, you look wonderful. Tell us everything. I stood in the doorway, watching the familiar scene unfold. My parents fawned over their eldest daughter and her picture-perfect family, hanging on her every word. How was her garden doing? What new words had Lucas learned? The minutiae of Sarah's life suddenly became the most fascinating topic on earth. Anna, be a dear, and put on some coffee, Mom called over her shoulder, not even bothering to look my way. Standing in the kitchen, listening to the laughter spilling from the living room, I couldn't help but think back to how things had always been. Sarah, 7 years my senior, had always been the star of the family show, while I was relegated to a supporting role, lucky to even get a line. I remember sitting at this same kitchen table when I was 11, proudly showing Mom my straight-A report card. She barely glanced at it, more interested in discussing Sarah's college applications. That's nice, Anna, she'd said absently, waving me away. Sarah, honey, which universities are your top choices? Those years were a blur of Sarah's achievements. Every dinner conversation revolved around her grades, her extracurriculars, her college prep. I'd sit there quietly, eating my peas, while Mom and Dad hung on Sarah's every word about AP classes and campus tours. The dynamic shifted even more dramatically when Sarah got accepted to Brighton University. I was 11, and I still remember that conversation vividly. We're so proud of you, sweetheart, Mom had exclaimed, tears in her eyes. We'll make it work, won't we, Robert? Dad nodded solemnly. We'll take out a student loan. Our Sarah deserves the best education possible. A week after Sarah left for college, my parents sat me down for a different kind of talk. Anna, Dad said, his voice serious, we need to tighten our belts for a while. The loan payments and Sarah's college expenses are significant. That's when things really changed. While my classmates got new phones every year, I kept my old flip phone until it literally fell apart. When I needed new clothes, we went to thrift stores instead of the mall. Christmas gifts became practical items like socks and school supplies. But they never forgot to send Sarah money. Your sister needs to focus on her studies, Mom would say, as she wrote another check. We can't let her feel stressed about money. I learned my lesson early. At 15, I joined every club and academic competition I could find. I stayed up late studying, not just for good grades, but for perfect ones. I wrote essays for scholarship competitions until my hands cramped because I knew there would be no student loans for me. It paid off. I got a full scholarship to State University. I still remember the look of relief on my parents' faces when I told them they wouldn't have to spend a dime on my education. Meanwhile, Sarah graduated, got a job in Brighton, and quickly married Mike, her college sweetheart. Within 2 years, she had Emma, followed shortly by Lucas. My parents were over the moon. Their perfect daughter had created a perfect family. Now, every monthly visit turned into the same routine. Sarah and Mike would show up with the kids, and before I could even say hello, Sarah would be planning her weekend. "Anna, you'll watch Emma and Lucas while we go shopping, right?" she'd say, not really asking. Mike and I hardly get any alone time these days. The first few times I tried to suggest that our parents could watch them instead. "Oh, honey," Mom would say, rubbing her back. "You know it's hard for me to keep up with young children, and your father needs his rest on weekends." So, there I was, spending yet another Saturday watching Frozen for the 100th time with Emma, while Lucas tried to color on my bedroom walls. Sarah and Mike were off having lunch with friends, and my parents were puttering around the garden, occasionally peeking in to ask if I needed anything, as if they were doing me a favor. I tried to console myself with the thought that it was just one weekend a month, just one weekend of being the free, reliable babysitter, while everyone else lived their lives. A year passed in this monthly rhythm of babysitting and bills. I had almost gotten used to it, almost. Then came the phone call that would turn my already complicated life completely upside down. I was doing dishes after dinner when I heard Mom's phone ring from the kitchen. I could hear her surprised voice. "Sarah? Oh, sweetheart, don't cry. Tell me what happened." Through sobs, Sarah explained that Mike's company had gone bankrupt without warning. They couldn't afford their rent anymore and had no savings. Could we maybe stay with you for a while?" Sarah's voice was so loud through the phone that I could hear it clearly. "Of course you can," Mom exclaimed without a moment's hesitation. "We'll make room." My stomach dropped. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. If they're moving in, maybe this would be a good time for me to get my own apartment? You'd think I'd suggested burning down the house. Mom looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Anna, don't be ridiculous. There's plenty of room for everyone." "But we're family," Dad said firmly. "We stick together during hard times." They arrived the following weekend with 3 cars full of belongings. I spent Saturday morning moving my things into what had been our storage room, the smallest bedroom in the house, barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. My old room, which was twice the size, became the kids' nursery because the children need space to play. Emma, now 5, and 3-year-old Lucas treated the entire house like their personal playground. They ran up and down the hallways screaming and laughing, while Sarah watched TV at full volume or had long, loud phone conversations with her friends about how difficult this transition was for her. Emma, Lucas. "Keep it down!" I'd call out when they burst into my room for the 10th time, scattering my work papers everywhere. "They're just playing, Anna," Sarah would say dismissively, not even looking up from her phone. "Don't be such a grouch." After work, all I wanted was to relax in my room, maybe read a book or watch something on my laptop. Instead, I got to listen to Baby Shark playing on repeat through the thin walls, punctuated by the constant thump of little feet running back and forth and Sarah's loud laughter at whatever show she was watching downstairs. Mike spent his days supposedly job hunting, but mostly I saw him sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone with a worried expression. "The job market's tough right now," he'd say whenever anyone asked, "but I'm sure something will come up soon." I lay in my tiny bed each night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the chaos that had become my home, and wondered how I'd let myself get trapped in this situation. But every time I thought about bringing up moving out again, I remembered my parents' reaction and kept quiet. The first utility bill after Sarah's family moved in hit me like a ton of bricks. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the numbers in disbelief. They were almost double what I usually paid. The water bill alone had skyrocketed, not to mention electricity and heating. Looking at my bank account, I realized that my dreams of saving for my own place were quickly evaporating. That evening at dinner, I decided to bring it up. "So, about the utility bills," I started, pushing my food around my plate. "They've doubled since last month. I can't keep covering all the bills by myself anymore. It's taking almost my entire salary. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. Are you seriously complaining about money right now, when Mike and I have lost everything? I'm not complaining, I tried to explain. I just think we need to figure out a fair way to… I can't believe how selfish you're being. Sarah's voice rose. We're going through the hardest time of our lives, and all you care about is money. Sarah's right, Anna, Mom jumped in. Family helps family. That's what we do. Dad nodded solemnly. Your sister and Mike need our support right now. This isn't the time to be counting pennies. I looked down at my plate, swallowing the words I really wanted to say. Fine, never mind. A week later, Mike finally got a job at an insurance company. It paid less than his previous position, but at least it was something. I thought maybe things would start getting better. I was wrong. It's so hard being alone with the kids all day, Sarah started complaining almost immediately. Mike leaves at 8 and doesn't get back until 6. I never get a break. Then it started. Small requests at first. Anna, could you watch the kids for an hour while I run to the store? Anna, would you mind keeping an eye on them while I take a shower? Before I knew it, these small favors had snowballed into something much bigger. I'd come home from work to find Sarah already dressed up to go out. Oh good, you're home, she'd say, grabbing her purse. Mike and I are meeting friends for dinner. Emma and Lucas already had their snack, but they'll need dinner in an hour. We'll be back by 10. Weekends became my personal nightmare. Sarah and Mike would casually announce their plans on Friday evening. A shopping trip, lunch with friends, a movie date, leaving me with the kids for hours. Mom and Dad conveniently started visiting relatives more often, usually disappearing right after Sarah and Mike left. So there I'd be, weekend after weekend, trying to keep Emma from drawing on the walls while Lucas had another tantrum because I cut his sandwich the wrong way. I'd spend my Saturdays cleaning up toys, making mac and cheese, and watching endless repeats of children's movies. By Sunday night, I'd be exhausted, my house would be a mess, and I'd still need to cook dinner for everyone. One evening, after a particularly exhausting weekend of childcare, I finally worked up the courage to say something at dinner. I need to talk to you all, I said, setting down my fork. I'm really tired. This situation with the childcare isn't working for me. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean isn't working? Are you saying you don't want to spend time with your own nephews? Mom reached over and patted Sarah's hand. Don't worry, honey. This is actually good practice for Anna. She'll need to know how to handle children when she becomes a mother herself someday. Think of it as training. And just like that, they went back to their usual dinner conversation. Sarah talking about her day, Mom and Dad hanging on her every word, Mike nodding along. I sat there, invisible once again, pushing food around my plate. Nothing changed after that conversation. If anything, it got worse. Sarah and Mike seemed to take my complaint as a challenge, finding even more reasons to go out. They'd be waiting by the door when I got home from work, car keys in hand. We're meeting friends at that new restaurant downtown, they'd say, already halfway out the door. Kids have had their snack. Thanks, Anna. Weekends became something I dreaded. I'd wake up on Saturday mornings with a knot in my stomach, knowing I'd spend the next 2 days watching Paw Patrol and mediating sibling fights while Sarah and Mike lived their best lives. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. I was at my desk at work, trying to focus on a marketing report despite my exhaustion, when my friend Rachel stopped by my cubicle. Hey, want to do something fun this weekend? She asked, perching on the edge of my desk. A bunch of us are going to the Pine Ridge Ski Resort. Just a quick weekend getaway. Leave Saturday morning, come back Sunday night. The slopes are supposed to be perfect right now. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of excitement. Friday evening, I was in my tiny bedroom packing my duffel bag, actually feeling happy about an upcoming weekend for once. I had just folded my warmest sweater when Sarah appeared in my doorway. What are you doing? She asked, eyeing my half-packed bag. Packing for a ski trip, I replied, rolling up my thermal socks. Going to Pine Ridge with some friends from work. Sarah's face darkened. You need to cancel. I looked up, startled by her tone. What? Why would I do that? Because, she said, crossing her arms. Mike and I are going to Aunt Linda's 60th birthday party in Milburn this weekend. Mom and Dad are coming too. You need to stay here with Emma and Lucas. I couldn't help but laugh. Actually laugh out loud at the sheer audacity of it all. You're joking, right? I said, continuing to fold my ski pants. You can't seriously expect me to cancel my plans because you didn't bother to tell me about yours. Sarah's face turned red. This isn't funny, Anna. You're being completely unreasonable. No, what's unreasonable is assuming I'll drop everything at a moment's notice to be your personal babysitter again. Sarah's mouth fell open. She stood there for a moment, sputtering, before turning on her heel and storming out of my room. Mom! Dad! Mike! I could hear her shouting down the hallway. You won't believe what Anna's doing! I kept packing, my hands shaking slightly with anger. The thundering of footsteps announced the arrival of the cavalry. My tiny room suddenly felt even smaller as Sarah, Mike, and my parents crowded in. Mom's face was already set in that disappointed expression I knew so well. What's this about you going skiing? She demanded, hands on her hips. Exactly what it sounds like, I replied, zipping up my duffel bag. I'm going to Pine Ridge Resort with my friends for the weekend. But you can't, Sarah exclaimed. We have Aunt Linda's party. No, you have Aunt Linda's party, I corrected her. I stopped what I was doing and turned to face them all. Why am I just hearing about this party now? Why wasn't I included in any of the planning? Mom hesitated, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Sarah jumped in, her voice dripping with condescension. We all discussed it and decided this would work best for everyone. We go to the party, you watch the kids. It's the most logical arrangement. You all discussed it, I repeated slowly. Without me. And decided what I would be doing with my weekend? How convenient. Well, you can't exactly bring small children to a sophisticated party. Sarah sniffed. Aunt Linda specifically said no kids. I shouldered my duffel bag. Sounds like a you problem. They're your kids, Sarah. Figure it out. What's that supposed to mean? Mike finally spoke up, frowning. It means exactly what it sounds like, I said, my voice rising. I have plans. I'm going skiing. Your children are your responsibility, not mine. If you can't bring them to the party, either don't go or hire a babysitter. A babysitter? Sarah screeched. With what money? Again, I said calmly. Not my problem. I turned to face them all, suddenly feeling stronger than I had in months, maybe years. Let me make this perfectly clear. I am going skiing tomorrow. I am done being your free, convenient babysitter. I'm done having my weekends hijacked, my plans ignored, and my life treated like it doesn't matter. If you need childcare, Sarah, that's your responsibility. Stop assuming I'll always be there to pick up your slack. The silence that followed was deafening. They all stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Sarah's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. Mom looked like she'd been slapped. Dad seemed to be trying to disappear into the doorframe. And Mike just stood there with that same confused expression he'd been wearing since his company went bankrupt. The moment of shocked silence didn't last long. Sarah's face crumpled, and she burst into theatrical sobs, covering her face with her hands. Mike muttered something that sounded distinctly like, "ungrateful bitch," under his breath. "How dare you?" Mom's voice rose. "After everything we've done for you, you're being completely irresponsible." "Selfish. Absolutely selfish," Dad chimed in, shaking his head. I stood there, my duffel bag still over my shoulder, watching my family turn into a Greek chorus of accusations. The words washed over me. Selfish, ungrateful, inconsiderate, immature. Each one meant to cut deep, to put me back in my place. Then Mom delivered what she clearly thought would be the knockout blow. "If you walk out that door tomorrow, don't bother coming back to this house." To everyone's surprise, I burst out laughing. Not a nervous giggle, but a full, genuine laugh. They all stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "You know what's funny?" I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "I've been dreaming about moving out of this house for months. I just didn't have the courage to do it. But here you are, giving me the perfect excuse. So thank you, Mom." Get out! Sarah shrieked, her fake sobs forgotten in her rage. Just get out. Gladly. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rachel's number, putting it on speaker just to make a point. Hey, R, sorry to call so late, but is that offer to crash at your place still good? Not just for after skiing, but maybe for a few days? Of course. Rachel's cheerful voice filled the room. I have a spare room. Want to come over now? That would be perfect. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I spent the next 15 minutes gathering everything I could fit in my car. Clothes, important documents, personal items. They watched from various doorways as I made trips up and down the stairs, as if they couldn't quite believe I was really doing it. When I had loaded the last box, I walked into the living room where they had all gathered. Oh, one more thing, I said, my voice steady. Since I won't be living here anymore, I won't be paying any of the bills either. You'll need to figure out how to support yourselves. Mom's face went pale. But the utilities, the groceries, not my problem anymore, I said, echoing my words from earlier. I turned and walked out the front door, ignoring Mom's suddenly panicked calls behind me. The drive to Rachel's place was a blur of adrenaline and relief. My phone kept lighting up with calls and messages, angry texts from Sarah, guilt-tripping novels from Mom, stern disappointments from Dad. I ignored them all. The next morning, Rachel and I drove to Pine Ridge Resort as planned. For the first time in what felt like forever, I spent a weekend doing exactly what I wanted to do. We skied, we laughed, we had hot chocolate by the fire, and not once did I have to worry about anyone else's children or problems. When we got back Sunday night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. With my salary no longer going to support my family, I could actually afford a decent place. By Wednesday, I had found a small but bright one-bedroom apartment in a nice area of town, just a 15-minute drive from my office. My first week in my new apartment was like learning to breathe again. Every morning, I woke up to blessed silence, no screaming children, no blaring TV, no guilt-inducing sighs from my mother. I could make coffee and drink it while it was still hot. I could spend my evenings reading or watching whatever I wanted on Netflix. The messages kept coming, though. I didn't answer the calls, but I couldn't help reading the texts. They followed a predictable pattern. Mom, how could you abandon your family like this? We need you. Sarah, you're so selfish. The kids keep asking where Aunt Anna is. Dad, your mother is very upset. You need to make this right. The messages cycled between guilt trips and anger, accusations and pleas. I read them all, but responded to none. My silence seemed to drive them even crazier. They weren't used to not having power over me. After a week of this, I was sitting on my new couch when Mom's number flashed on my phone again. This time, I decided to answer. Anna, finally! Mom's voice was sharp. I can't believe you ruined our entire weekend. Aunt Linda's party was completely disrupted because of your selfish behavior. Sarah and Mike couldn't come because you refused to watch the children. Stop. My voice was quiet but firm. Just stop. I'm done with this, Mom. I'm done being treated like a servant in my own home. I'm done being expected to sacrifice everything, my time, my money, my life, for everyone else's convenience. I'm done being the family ATM and free babysitter while being treated like I don't matter. There was a long pause on the other end. When Mom spoke again, her voice had changed to that wheedling tone I knew so well. Honey, I know things haven't been perfect, but we're family. We need you. The bills this month, we're struggling without your help. No, Mom, I'm done. Maybe someday we can have a relationship again, but it will be on equal terms. No more manipulation, no more guilt trips, no more treating me like a walking wallet or free childcare service. Until then, I need space to live my own life. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I went through my phone and blocked them all, Mom, Dad, Sarah, even Mike. I blocked them on social media too. It felt both terrifying and liberating, like cutting anchor lines I hadn't even realized were holding me down. Maybe someday I'll be ready to have my family back in my life. Maybe with enough time and distance, we can build something new, something healthier, with boundaries and respect. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I'm done sacrificing my own happiness and well-being to meet their endless demands. Story 2. I had no intention of creating an empire. When my husband Michael's 80-hour work weeks as a corporate lawyer left me alone with our large home in Boston's upscale Beacon Hill neighborhood, it began as a coping mechanism for my loneliness. What started out as handcrafted jewelry sold on Etsy evolved into something they couldn't have predicted. Not least of all is Patricia Wellington, my mother-in-law, who never squandered an occasion to tell me that I was inferior to her beloved son. At our monthly family lunches, Mom would add, "Another craft fair, dear." She spoke in a condescending tone. How charming! If only she were aware that last week was the millionth order sent from my small handmade company. If only my spouse realized that I was developing a brand that would eventually surpass the value of his whole legal practice, while he was charging $800 an hour to become a partner. It's getting ahead of itself, though. I'll begin from the beginning. 5 years ago, I was merely a graphic artist named Emily Chen Wellington who fell in love with a lawyer from a wealthy Boston family. The Wellingtons never let people forget that they can trace their ancestry back to the Mayflower. "At least you're Chinese," his mother told me when Michael proposed. "These days, that's almost acceptable. Your kids will excel at math." Then I ought to have run. Rather, like my immigrant parents did when they first arrived in America, I suffered and smiled as I had been taught. Keep your head down, put up a lot of effort, and success will come. Those lonely nights gave rise to the concept for Luxe Craft. I created contemporary jewelry with an Asian fusion touch by combining my graphic design expertise with traditional Chinese craft methods that my grandmother had taught me. After I listed my first work on Etsy, it sold within hours. It was an exquisite jade necklace with a modern geometric pattern wrapped in silver wire. "I like that, honey." Michael hardly looked up from his case files when I informed him. "Perhaps concentrate on redesigning the house instead. Next month, the partners will join us for supper." While Patricia organized charity galas and Michael rose through the corporate ranks, I did concentrate on the house by turning our 3-car garage into a studio. I was creating something groundbreaking. My designs steal ideas from publications, fashion blogs, and celebrities. Orders came in more quickly than I could complete them. To assist with manufacturing, I recruited other immigrant ladies from my mother's church. Many of them, like Mrs. Zhang and Mrs. Kim, were engineers and artists back home, but were unable to find employment in the United States. We collaborated to develop a manufacturing system that scaled operations without sacrificing handcrafted quality. I studied supply chains, marketing, and e-commerce in my nightly online business classes. Luxcraft.com is the evolution of my tiny Etsy store. After starting with jewelry, we moved on to handbags and finally home decor. Every item conveyed a narrative. Combining Western design with Eastern workmanship, the length of our waiting lists increased. Despite the calls from venture capitalists, little changed at home. Michael was too preoccupied to realize that I would no longer be using his credit cards. At gatherings, Patricia continued to introduce me as Michael's crafty wife. Judge Wellington, my father-in-law, still referred to me as the town's artist. That gave the impression that it was a mental illness. The supper that made all the difference then arrived. Patricia's house on Beacon Hill was the site of a memorable family get-together. Every member of the Wellington family, including Michael's siblings and their well-off wives, physicians, attorneys, and investment bankers, would be present. Everything. We had recently finalized an agreement to distribute our products to a large chain of upscale department stores. Therefore, I was late. Michael was already there, discussing their most recent cases with his brother. "We were just talking about you, Emily darling." As I walked into the formal dining area, Patricia cried out, "20. Wellington eyes looked at me. "Tom." I was aware of it. She used the same one while talking about the assistants. "Patricia told us about your little internet store." Amanda, adjusting her Hermes scarf, added, "That's Michael's sister-in-law." "How much of an entrepreneur are you?" As I sat down, I noticed the metro. I was seated at the far end of the table, away from the crucial discussions, as Patricia had planned. The first course was served by the caterers. Spoons made of mother-of-pearl with imported caviar, I didn't pay attention to my phone buzzing in my handbag. You may wait for another message from the Amazon acquisition team. Patricia tapped her crystal glass to draw attention to her announcement. What's best for the Wellington name has been on my mind. Michael grinned, as his making partner this year finally joined the family history of true success. She kept kissing me with her social grin because I had taken a drink of alcohol. We must talk about Emily's pastime. Like a poisoned dart, the word lingered in the air. As Patricia began her well-prepared speech, I noticed that my cheeks were flushed. A Wellington spouse has responsibilities and expectations to meet. We are not your typical folks that have to sell things on the internet. Michael, my love, it's time, don't you think? Emily, concentrate on more suitable pursuits. There is a vacancy on the hospital board. Time and time again, my phone buzzed. Mom's correct. Taking off his Hermes tie, Michael said. My income is more than plenty for us both. This is a craft. At this level of society, it's a little humiliating. The Wellingtons all nodded in agreement with my social shortcomings, yet the buzzing continued. At last, I took out my phone. I missed 5 calls from my investment banker, 10 from my lawyer, and 1 message that would make everyone in Wellington smile condescendingly. The last offer from your massive Amazon is $80 million in cash plus shares. Tonight, Nick will respond. Patricia was scowling at me for breaking dinner etiquette when I looked up from my phone. If only she had anticipated it. Patricia went on with her talk about what a Wellington spouse should do. A weird serenity descended upon me. 5 years of being treated with contempt and like a charity case, who was fortunate enough to marry into their cherished family. It was almost over. Are you even paying attention, Emily? Patricia's piercing voice interrupted my train of thought. This is significant. The name Wellington will work perfectly. Every head at the table turned as I interrupted and got to my feet. Patricia had never been interrupted by me before. In fact, I believe its value is set to increase significantly. Michael scowled. Don't be theatrical, Emily. Mother is only attempting to assist. Actually, I responded in a firm voice, my home has made an announcement. I looked straight at Patricia. You're correct. Now let's talk about my small pastime. I opened my phone and started reading the email. After doing a thorough assessment, Amazon is happy to make our best and last offer to purchase Luxcraft Incorporated, Mrs. Chen Wellington, $80 million in cash and $20 million in Amazon stock options, with the possibility of an extra $50 million in 3 years or less. The ensuing hush was deafening. Michael's $400 dinner plate clattered with his 4. Patricia muttered that it was impossible. She had a pallid face. Last year, your little internet craft store brought in $42 million. I kept becoming used to my work. We collaborate with Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom, and Bloomingdale's. We have a 6-month waiting list for bespoke creations, and that contribution to charity you boasted about before, Patricia, the one where the Asian American Arts Foundation received $50,000 from you. Actually, I and the biggest anonymous donor provided that. Judge Wellington raised his bushy eyebrows. Are you claiming that your craft company is worth $100 million? No. Grinning, I looked at my phone once more. This new message claims that Google just rejected Amazon's offer. It is currently valued at $120 million. Michael got up so fast that his chair toppled over. However, the breadwinner, though, is me. Calmly, I said, I make 7 figures in that in a month. You thought I was playing with beads on those nights. While you were billing hours, I was creating an empire. More than 200 women, primarily immigrants, who had advanced degrees but were unable to find suitable employment, now have jobs thanks to my efforts. Suddenly, Amanda's Hermes scarves appeared a little snug around her neck. However, you remained silent. Did you think I was real? Glancing around the table, I inquired, would I have been taken seriously by any of you? Additionally, you believed that becoming a partner in a legal firm was the pinnacle of success. Patricia was well enough to try to limit the damage. Well, that's fantastic news. Emily has potential I always claimed. No, I interrupted her once again. I was humiliating, you always stated, that your son was superior than me, that my small pastime was a disgrace to the city of Wellington. I looked at my spouse. And you, Michael, how recently have you inquired about my work? How recently did you visit the garage to check what I was building? You said that I was squandering. As years of suppressed wrath suddenly found a voice, the room whirled with tension. I wasn't done, though. I reached inside my handbag and took out another piece of paper. For weeks, I had been holding on to something, waiting for the appropriate time. I handed the document across the table to Michael and added, "There's one more thing. I nearly forgot to bring it up because I've been so preoccupied with the acquisition talks. My lawyer sent them to me last week. The papers were taken up by Michael." His hands shook a little. As he read the divorce title petition, his face became white instead of crimson. "However, why?" He stumbled. "We can resolve this. I'm aware of the money now." I responded by gathering my belongings for just that reason. "Michael, 5 years. 5 years of treating me like a charity case, dismissing me, and disparaging my efforts. You nodded and grinned while your mother tore me down for 5 years. I'm not leaving for the money. It's just what gave me the confidence to do it at last." I turned to the startled table as a whole. "And Patricia, too. Recall that you stated last month that the Wellingtons don't make fair trinkets. They only wear genuine jewels. You're wearing the necklace you boasted you got at Tiffany's. I own it. Our largest wholesale customer is Tiffany's." Patricia's hand touched the $12,000 necklace and shot to her throat. She would be awake all night. I could almost picture her going over in her head all the praise she would get for her wonderful taste. Judge Wellington regained his voice as I approached the door. "You can't merely, young woman, look here." "I can, in fact." I paused at the entrance and stated that. "Michael, one more thing. Do you recall how you constantly demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement to safeguard the wealth of the Wellington family? You may wish to document 7.3, which states that, unless otherwise noted, any business assets created during the marriage are regarded as joint property." Michael's face became green instead of white. I grinned. "Do not be concerned. I have no interest in partnering with your legal practice. However, I felt you ought to be aware. You are technically the owner of half of my business. I sold your shares to my staff last week for $1 while you were doing it. They merited it." I was delighted by the cacophony of voices behind me as I left. This was not the end, however. They had only just begun to learn about meeting the wrong person while naked. The following morning, there was a media boom. The artisan company owned by an immigrant lady brings in $120 million, made headlines in all of the major business magazines. Journalists kept calling to ask how a mere craftsman had created such a vast enterprise, right beneath the claws of Boston society. I hadn't been kicked out of the Wellington family group chat yet, but that's where the main drama was happening. "Patricia, we are damaged by her. At the club, everyone is conversing. Amanda, in order to get business advice, my friends are requesting me to put them in touch with Emily. Michael, calm down, mother. My co-workers are complimenting me on my wife's business ventures. Jed, Wellington. Do you want to tell me how we met, Sam?" "Children." I turned off my phone and grinned as I entered Lux Crafts' headquarters, a refurbished textile mill in Cambridge that housed more than 200 workers, the most of whom were immigrant women like my mother. My first employee and current chief operating officer, Mrs. Zhang, greeted me at the door. She smiled knowingly and continued, "The Google acquisition team is here. You won't believe the other people in the lobby either." As I turned the corner, Patricia Wellington was pacing uneasily while holding on to her expensive handmade necklace. "Dear Emily," she froze upon seeing me. With a forced social grin, she started. "Mrs. Wellington, I've been thinking about last night." I gently interrupted. "It will be necessary for you to make an appointment with my assistant. I am currently meeting with the leadership team of Google." "We are family, though," she objected. "Are we?" I arched an eyebrow. "Last evening. I was clearly not Wellington material, as you stated. Please pardon me now." Google's senior executives waded through the glass walls of our main conference room, where I passed her. I saw Patricia's expression when she recognized that tech behemoths were pursuing the craft pastime she had rejected. The weeks that followed flew by. With or without potential, Google's offer was $150 million more than Amazon's closing price. The narrative went viral. Her blue blood in-laws make fun of her pastime as an immigrant woman creates a $1 million enterprise. An interview was requested by all major networks. Colleagues at Michael's law firm began sending their spouses to Luxcraft for trunk displays. The same women from society who had ignored me at Patricia's parties are now called daily, and they want to fund my next project. However, the closing supper for the transaction was the most memorable event. The same upscale eatery where the Wellingtons had formerly made me feel alienated was now rented out by Google. I noticed Michael and his family sneaking into the side entrance as I got up to speak. To be there, it clearly pulled strings. I started 5 years ago. I was informed that immigrant women should be aware of their place in society and that craft fairs were inappropriate for some social classes. That achievement required taking conventional routes. Patricia moved in her chair uneasily. However, I learned something different from my mother. Success, according to her, isn't about blending in with other people. You have to construct your own. I pointed to the immigrant ladies who were now Luxcraft executives. We did more than merely create a business together. We created a community. We demonstrated how hobbies can transform lives and how craft fairs can grow into empires. And that sometimes the folks who write you off wind up being the ones who see you succeed. From the corner of my eye, I saw the room erupt in cheers. Michael looked at me as if he had never seen me before, and I saw Patricia wipe away her tears. Following the meal, Mrs. John came up to me with information that completed my triumph. A Distinguished Innovation Award has been chosen for our immigrant employment program. Patricia's favorite project, the Wellington Foundation for Social Progress, is the presenter. The very persons they denigrated will have to get an award. Mrs. John chuckled. Karma is real. 3 months later, the divorce was completed. Michael made every effort to regain my affection. I'm now enthralled with my true entrepreneurial spirit. But certain bridges cannot be unburned, as I said to the divorce court. In Back Bay, I purchased a penthouse near to Patricia's favorite social club. I saw her social circle lining up at the upscale craft flagship shop across the street every morning, boasting about their close relationship with the founder. I was invited to speak at the Women's Leadership Conference at Michael's legal business last week. How to succeed. When others doubt you is the theme of breaking through. I said no. I was too busy starting our new foundation, which gives immigrant women entrepreneurs seed money. After decades of waiting for the Wellingtons to join, Patricia's Country Club, the last twist of the Knife King yesterday, welcomed me to become an honorary member. I agreed, but only on the proviso that they allow membership to our other immigrant leaders, including Mrs. John. However, things aren't done that way. The committee for membership sputtered. Then maybe it's time for a change. They agreed, I said. I sat at the nicest table, which Patricia had always claimed as her own, for coffee at the club this morning. I open an email from a young immigrant lady who read my tale as I'm drinking my latte. You demonstrate to me that we can create our own tables when others refuse to let us sit at theirs, and that our aspirations don't have to fit into someone else's box. I appreciate you disproving them. I glanced around the room, where the old money now avidly sought out fresh ideas, and the society ladies vied for my attention. Patricia was also present. As her previous social group approached my table, she noticed me sitting in a corner and gave me a little, dejected nod. At last, she realized what they had made fun of. They had developed an infatuation with my origins, my inventiveness, and my small pastime. I returned the nod and went back to drinking my coffee. After all, the finest form of retaliation is success. But altering the rules, that is invaluable. It buzzed on my phone. Another request for an interview, this time from Forbes. They wanted to write about me in their issue on self-made women. I smiled at the proposed title. How an immigrant's hobby upended high society and created a $150 million empire, the craft queen of Boston. At times I believed that getting even wasn't the greatest form of retaliation. They must look up to see you because of the expanding supply, and occasionally, those who reject your aspirations have to see them come true. Through the windows of the empire, they never thought you could create, from a distance. Story 3. I was 7 years old when it all started. My family led a tranquil, predictable existence and was typical. While my mother, Sophia, balanced a part-time job and domestic responsibilities, My younger brother Ethan and I spent our days playing in the backyard. Dad Adrian frequently arrived home late from his lengthy workdays. He was more like a passing shadow. Before that day, life was easy. From the front door, I recall hearing my mother's voice beckoning me frantically. "Chloe, come on over here. This is something you must hear." She was radiant. She was holding Ethan's hands tightly. I sprinted over to her. I'm curious yet perplexed. She dropped on her knees. She hardly controlled her eagerness. "Your sibling?" "Is a musical genius," she replied, her voice faltering. "He has excellent pitch, according to his instructor. Are you aware of how uncommon that is?" Her passion was contagious, even if I didn't entirely comprehend. From then on, everything was different. Everything in our existence revolved around Ethan's piano classes. In order to devote herself fully to his developing skill, Mom resigned her work, converting our house into a little studio with a piano, sheet music stores, and microphones. She put all of her effort into organizing his calendar, which included both weekend events and everyday classes. Ethan flourished under her tutelage, and everyone who heard him was moved by his lovely, pure voice. Before long, he was becoming well known outside of our tiny town and winning local competitions. Mom was overjoyed. Every time she talked about him, her pride was evident. "My Ethan will become a famous person," she would say. Dreams of his future were flashing in her eyes. However, I felt like I was receding into the background while Ethan's star rose. Once split between us, Mom's attention now seemed to be exclusively for him. My accomplishments, a good test score and a diligently drawn picture, were greeted with brief, preoccupied praise. She kept returning her attention to Ethan. Dad, however, continued to be aloof. He was too worn out from his lengthy workdays to participate in the increasingly complicated affairs of our home. He sat quietly in front of the TV, or hid himself in the garage when he was at home. He appeared happy to let Mom take care of everything, including our widening gap. I was able to support myself by the time I reached 10. I learned not to look to my parents for approval, cooked my own food, and finished my schoolwork by myself. I began to carry the pain of neglect in silence, turning to literature and my trips to Grandma Helen's bakery for solace. Grandma, in contrast to Mom, thought of me as Chloe, not simply Ethan's sibling. "My darling, you're resilient and observant." As she was showing me how to knead dough, she would say, "Don't allow someone to diminish your significance." As Ethan reveled in his mother's full attention, her words turned into a lifeline. I held on to the little affirmations that made me feel good about myself. I had no idea that the silent power I was developing would one day help me overcome obstacles much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The distance between my world and Ethan's expanded like a chasm as I got older. As I moved through life in silence behind his shadow, he was the golden kid, lavished with opportunity and acclaim. Ethan, his lessons, his performances, and his future were the center of Mom's existence. I became the one who could handle things on her own and handle me, the afterthought. I turned to books as a haven and a way to escape the constant comparison. I lose myself in tales of tenacity and adventure, seeing worlds far different from mine. I found a small group of friends at school who provided me with the companionship I didn't have at home. We laughed and spoke about our dreams with them in the park or the library throughout the afternoons. Instead of being continuously eclipsed by the genius of others, I felt like an equal. Ethan and I had radically different treatment. As I traveled to our neighborhood school via public bus, Ethan was driven to a prominent school known for its music curriculum. Mom packed delicious lunches, fussed over his outfit, and frequently went with Dad to make sure he had all he needed for me. There were only quick farewells and reminders to get home on time. No such customs. However, Grandma Helen and her charming bakery on Maple Street saved my bacon. I'd go there every day after school. The aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries envelops me like a cozy embrace. There is my diligent worker. My grandmother would welcome me. Her kind grin was a comfort to my tired heart. It was more than a chore to assist her. It turned into something to be proud of. During peak hours, I would take over the cash register, wipe the counters, and set up the display. I felt appreciated for the first time, for my own efforts, not for the accomplishments of others. Chloe, you're a natural. Grandma's eyes would sparkle as she spoke. Without you, this business wouldn't function half as well. I was unaware of the depth of the gap that her words filled. Grandma considered my independence as a strength, whereas my mother saw it as a convenience. She gave me a little salary, which I carefully saved since I knew I would eventually need it for something significant. Her support and faith in me were the only things that prevented me from completely fading into oblivion. Ethan, meanwhile, flourished in the limelight. His name frequently appeared in local publications, and he played at recitals that attracted sizable audiences. Mom put his prizes on full display. Every word she spoke about him was laced with pride. Greatness is in his destiny, as if the rest of us were merely bystanders to his journey, she would frequently say. Even though I applauded Ethan during his performances, I couldn't help but feel jealous. I felt like I was being forgotten, even though it wasn't his fault. A supporting role in another person's narrative. But during the quiet times at Grandma's bakery, I started to understand that my value was independent of other people's opinions. I was gradually coming to establish my own course. As Ethan's success kept growing, our family's dynamics underwent a radical change. We had lost what little equilibrium we had. Ethan's career, his practices, competitions, and the never-ending barrage of auditions and interviews took up Mom's every waking moment. Music coaches, photographers, and fans flocked to our house to watch the prodigy in action, turning it into a center of activity. Even though I was invisible, I was there. Only when it was absolutely necessary was my presence acknowledged. Without hesitation, Mom threw her money and energy into Ethan's success. She arranged for private lessons, accompanied him to music festivals, and made sure he always had the greatest gear and attire for his performances. Everything else, even my little victories, seemed insignificant to her. When I told her about an award I received at school, or proudly displayed an essay I had worked hard on, her answers were aloof, almost robotic. "That's good. Chloe, good for you." She would say so before hurriedly leaving to attend to Ethan's next important function. Even Dad, who had always kept his distance, now seemed to find solace in focusing on Ethan's growing fame. He rarely spoke to me beyond the occasional house school, and was more often than not absorbed in work or the television. The little recognition I'd once received from him faded entirely, as he, too, succumbed to the gravitational pull of Ethan's talent at school. I maintained good grades and even joined the debate club, hoping to find a space where I could shine in my own right. Yet at home, my achievements felt meaningless. The family's conversations revolved around Ethan's upcoming auditions and the possibility of him attending a world-renowned music academy. My efforts to be seen to matter fell flat against the ever-growing wall of their expectations for Ethan. I still helped at Grandma's bakery, where I felt a flicker of purpose. "You're doing great, Chloe," Grandma would tell me as we kneaded dough together. But even her affirmations couldn't completely drown out the feeling of being sidelined. The distance between Ethan and myself wasn't simply about attention. It was a chasm formed by our parents' decisions. One that left me battling with my place in a household that seemed to have room for just one star. Ethan auditioned for the famous National Youth Choir was the event that appeared to convert our family into a pressure cooker. Mom was pleased when the invitation arrived. A handwritten note from the choir's director, no less. She could not contain her enthusiasm, waving the letter about as though it were a golden ticket. "This is Ethan's opportunity," she remarked. "And chance like this might start him on the path to international success." Her delight was short-lasted, though, as we gathered around the kitchen table that evening, discussing Ethan's trip to New York. The bills gradually mounted up. Flights, hotel accommodations, new performance clothes, and costs for the audition itself. "It'll be tight," Mom conceded, her voice laced with dread. "But we'll manage." Dad's face grew serious. "Leah." "We're already overburdened," he stated in a stern yet hushed voice. "We cannot continue to spend down our savings in this manner." Mom yelled, "This is for Ethan's future!" Why even hesitate? It was not the end of their fight. I heard their muffled conversations coming from behind their closed bedroom door that night as I was getting ready for bed. I drew nearer, listening intently. "Not much has been saved for Chloe's college education. Dad stated it was clear he was frustrated. "What should we do if she asks for our assistance?" Mom retorted, "She's resourceful. Chloe is going to work things out. She does it every time." It hurt to hear those remarks. I silently retreated from the door as a knot formed in my throat. Ethan wasn't the only thing that came first. It was the belief that I wasn't deserving of or in need of the same degree of assistance. Resolved to disprove them, I immediately started saving for college. I started putting every dollar into a little ceramic piggy bank that Grandma had given me years prior, after she promised to pay me a fair rate for my assistance at the bakery. Regardless of my parents' support, or lack thereof, every penny and every crinkled bell seemed like a step towards safeguarding my future. The stress at home continued for months. Even though Denise Ethan wowed the judges at his audition, the financial burden had an impact. I keep my piggy bank tucked away in a closet corner and make an effort to remain goal-focused. I made the decision to check my funds one day after I got back from Grandma's bakery. I was curious to see how much I had amassed. However, I felt uneasy when I took up the piggy bank. It weighed far less than it ought to have. I shook it, my pulse racing, but instead of the frenetic clatter of money, I heard a spooky quiet. My worst suspicions were validated when I busted it open. It was deserted. I sat there in shock, feeling a wave of betrayal and incredulity. Who was able to accept it? My first thought was of my mother. Had she stolen my money to pay for Ethan's audition? My stomach turned at the notion. That night, my voice trembling with rage, I faced her. "Did you steal my funds, Mom?" Before acknowledging that it was for Ethan's vacation, she hesitated for an excessive amount of time, and her face gave away. "We had no other option, Chloe. I was stolen from by you." I spoke in a hurtful tone that was just above a whisper. "Stop being so dramatic," she yelled. "It's all for Ethan's future and the family. You'll comprehend eventually." However, I didn't comprehend. I only experienced the piercing pain of betrayal. Without my permission, my hard-earned funds and any remaining faith in my parents had been stolen. The decisions made by my family weighed heavily on me that night, as I sat by myself in my room, leaving a deep ache in its wake. It was a sad day when I received my acceptance letter to college. I had obtained a partial scholarship and been accepted to the public university to study economics. Even yet, receiving the scholarship seemed like a win. It was not comprehensive. Living expenses, textbooks, and tuition were still factors to take into account. One evening after supper, I went up to my parents, determined to make things work. "Mom, Dad," I started to grip the letter firmly. "I've received a state university acceptance. Although I received a scholarship, I will require assistance to cover the remaining expenses." Dad looked over the edge of his newspaper at me. He scowled. "That's fantastic news, Chloe," he remarked, but his voice seemed unenthusiastic. "It's tight right now, but, you know." "Tight?" With a sinking heart, I echoed. "Mom, what about the money you saved for my college education?" Occupied with cleaning the table, scarcely raised his head. "The majority of that is used in Ethan's music school." "Chloe, you'll have to work it out. You're resourceful." Despite the usual hurt of their remarks, I was able to nod stiffly and excuse myself. I laid in bed later that night, feeling a deep pain of disappointment. Any expectation of financial assistance from them was obviously pointless. I didn't give up, though. I even got a part-time job at the college cafeteria and took on extra shifts at my grandmother's bakery. I put every dollar I made toward my mounting list of bills. Grandma did everything she could to help me. Her constant support was a lifeline. "Chloe, you're going to succeed." "With conviction," she would say. My mother unexpectedly showed up at my apartment a few months into my first semester. Her hands were wringing uneasily, and she appeared nervous. "I need your help, Chloe," she said. Her voice wavered. "I need to borrow some money because of an emergency." After some hesitation, I gave in and moved a sizable amount of my savings to her account. She told me it's for something significant. "I'll reimburse you as soon as I can." As the weeks went by, the cost of tuition and rent began to drain my bank account. Mom's tone changed when I asked her for repayment. "It's family money, Chloe. Disregardfully," she said. "Ethan's future demands sacrifices, and you're not in immediate need." She said something that was like a slap. At that moment, I recognized that the emergency had been another of Ethan's musical endeavors. I was deeply hurt by the betrayal, and for the first time, I felt a burning rage inside of me. Grandma encouraged me to get legal counsel. She said firmly, "Chloe, this isn't just about the money. It's about advocating for oneself." Armed with text messages and bank statements that amply demonstrated Mom's dishonesty, I filed a case. They were bizarre court proceedings, in months, for the first time. I turned to face Mom. She had an angry and defiant look on her face. Ethan avoided looking at me as he sat quietly in the back. As soon as my lawyer presented the evidence, Mom's made-up account of a family emergency came to an end. The judge gave me a favorable ruling, directing Mom to pay my legal fees and return the money plus interest. I had won, but it didn't feel real. The consequences were severe and quick. Mom portrayed herself as a victim on social media. An unappreciative daughter betrays her mother. I was inundated with angry and disappointed messages from relatives who had only heard her side of the story. "You have brought shame to our family." One aunt gave a reprimand. "How could you do this to your mother?" Despite the backlash, I stood firm. Grandma's unwavering support kept me grounded. Her voice served as a continual reminder that I made the correct decision. Let them talk. She'd say the truth will always come out in the end. Though the familial bonds were shattered, I felt a newfound strength. I had fought for myself and my future, and no amount of criticism could take that away. Several weeks after the court ruling, I received an unexpected call from Dad. His voice, hesitant yet heartfelt, shocked me. "Chloe, may we talk?" he asked. "I've read your mother's posts, but I want to hear your side of the tale." We met at a little cafe near my flat. The discussion difficult at first. Slowly, I recounted everything throughout the years of feeling disregarded, the sacrifices I'd made, and the treachery that led to legal action. Dad listened quietly. His face darkened with remorse. "I failed you," he said, his voice husky. I felt supplying financially was enough, but I neglected what was occurring at home. "I let your mother take the reins, and I understand now how much you've suffered because of it." His remarks evoked a combination of emotions, fury, despair, but also a gleam of hope. For the first time, Dad wasn't distant. He was there, acknowledging the anguish I had held for so long. Dad started looking into the family's finances because he was determined to set things right. We were both astonished by what he discovered. For many years, Mom had been transferring money out of their joint account to support Ethan's interests, while ignoring household bills and even taking out loans in both of their names. He shook his head and remarked, "I should have paid more attention." I had complete faith in her. He was enraged, yet determined by the realization. In an effort to start again and provide me with the kind of support he had never provided before, he filed for divorce. Dad's apologies and acts signaled the start of our reconciliation, even if they didn't change the past. I felt like I had a parent who genuinely cared for me for the first time in years. We started working together to re-establish the connection we had both desired but had never known how to achieve. Our family's already shaky roots were rocked by the sudden revelation of Ethan's voice impairment. He strained his voice too far during a concert on top of a cold mountain, which caused a serious illness in his throat. Even with the greatest medical attention, the harm could not be undone. Ethan was no longer able to sing. Mom's entire world fell apart. Her son, on whom she had centered her whole existence, had become less brilliant. Mom hid herself in her room the day the doctors verified Ethan's illness, and there was a spooky silence in the house. She became unidentifiable, confused, and muttering about unrealized potential and dashed hopes over the next few weeks. Her neighbors asked for assistance one evening when her sorrow erupted into frenzy. After being diagnosed with a serious nervous breakdown, she was taken to a mental health facility. Ethan spent months in a depressive state due to his sadness and remorse. He distanced himself from everyone and used beer to numb his suffering. Dad and I made an agonizingly slow effort to draw him out of the shadows. Ethan finally started to come out of the shadows following months of treatment and recovery groups. "I can no longer sing, but I can still teach," he stated one day over coffee. Without the pressure I had, Perhaps I can assist others discover their passion for music. I noticed a glimmer of purpose in his eyes for the first time in years. After enrolling in a teaching program, Ethan went on to teach choir at a nearby school. "This is my second chance," he said quietly, resolutely. Despite the unexpected turn in life, Ethan's path to recovery provided a feeling of closure. His salvation demonstrated that one may get back up and start over even after falling. In retrospect, I can see how our family's divisions molded each of us. By inspiring people to embrace music without the burden of expectations, Ethan discovered a purpose beyond celebrity. Dad took charge and became the encouraging father I had always wanted. Despite being damaged, even Mom started the mending process. For my part, I carved myself a path based on self-worth and resilience after discovering my own abilities. I learned from life's hardships that suffering frequently leads to development, and even if the scars are still there, they serve as a reminder of my progress. Ultimately, I come out stronger, smarter, and more prepared to take on whatever is ahead,